do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
The Washington Wizards are quietly one of the most interesting teams in the NBA. They've got one star in Bradley Beal, whose name has been in trade rumors for what feels like forever, and another in John Wall, who is coming off multiple major injuries and on a massive contract. When healthy, this team feels like it should make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, but maybe it's time for a rebuild. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. Today we're going to be talking about the Washington Wizards. So ever since John Wall first went down with injury, people have been signaling the Wizards to potentially start looking for, moves for Bradley Beal, try to tear down the roster, get some younger players and some assets, and rebuild from the ground up. But the Wizards have so far been very reluctant to do that, even signing Beal to a contract extension last offseason when many people thought that he was, going to want out, he would maybe demand a trade, or the team would be willing to move off of him, but both sides have decided that they want to remain together, at least for the time being, and we have no indication that anything has changed on that front. Now, that doesn't mean that a Bradley Beal trade won't happen, but it certainly, is looking less and less likely as we move along. Beal is a really, really good player. Beal is one of the best scorers in the league, averaged well over 30 points this season and somehow still didn't make the All-Star team, which was pretty inexplicable to me. But he has proven himself to be, one of the best shooting guards in the NBA. He's a great scorer, a pretty good playmaker as well, a guy who you can run off the ball and on the ball as well, has multiple skill sets around there. And he is just a guy who plays winning basketball. It's unfortunate that he's been on a pretty bad Wizards team for the past couple of years. He is certainly a guy who contenders would love to get their hands on. It would take a lot to pry him away from Washington. It would take a pretty major package in order to make that happen, just because Beal is really, really good. And it seems like most people are aware of that. I wouldn't call him an underrated player. He certainly feels to me to be well respected within the league and recognized as one of the premier scorers. So for right now, it doesn't look like there will be a trade in the works, but potentially before his contract is up. He's got next season and then a year after that and then a player option, so he's with the Wizards for the time being, but maybe as that contract inches closer and closer to expiring, and if the team still isn't going anywhere, then maybe they consider a move within a year or two. And then there's John Wall, who just a couple of years ago was considered to be one of the best point guards in the league, but he's had a couple major injuries in the past 2 to 3 years, and we just don't know what he's going to look like when he comes back. I believe he had to have knee surgery in 2018, and then had an Achilles tear while he was still rehabbing from that knee injury, which knocked him out for all of last year. So it's been a long time since we've seen John Wall play basketball, and he is on a massive contract, even more than Bradley Beal, for upwards of $40 million for the next 3 seasons, and that is an albatross of a contract. It just sucks for both sides. For the Wizards, they signed him to that deal, and then he, ended up getting hurt, and now he probably won't ever be the same player, which just sucks that they committed that, a large amount of money to a player who, is going to be injured and never will be the same. And then for Wall, it just, it sucks that he's not been able to be on the court because, obviously basketball players love to play, and he's been struggling with injury a lot over the past couple of years. So we will have to see how Wall looks in his return. I definitely am anticipating a lot of rust coming back early. He'll take a while to get back into game shape and playing at his highest level. Certainly I don't think he will be on the same level that he was when he got hurt, but I am a little bit optimistic that he can come back and it still be an above average point guard, at least be effective. It's a little bit weird because he was a guy who relied a lot on athleticism and speed. Both of those things are the first 2 things to go when you have leg injuries like Achilles and knee surgeries and stuff. So as far as him coming back at 100% from injury, it seems unlikely to me. But I would think that on that contract number, the Wizards might consider looking for a trade for him. I'm sure that they are looking for a trade for him. But on that, like I mentioned, upwards of $40 million a season for 3 more years, it might be the worst contract in the league depending on how he looks when he comes back. So it's going to be really, really hard to find a taker. Potentially, it could be an incentive to trade Beal as well if you package the 2 of them together and say, hey, if you want to take Bradley Beal, you also got to take John Wall's contract off of our books. because, that's a negative asset for them, so they can potentially use that as, a bargaining chip in order to get off of John Wall by also removing Bradley Beal. So, there's not a lot of teams who have that amount of cap space to take on both of those players, but that's at least something to consider. So, a John Wall trade doesn't feel likely this offseason just because of how much money he's making, but maybe if he looks okay when he comes back and as he inches closer to that contract expiring, then maybe there's a chance that we see him moved. But for right now, that's one of the most untradeable contracts in the NBA. So now let's take a look at the cap sheet, and they have a couple free agents of consequence, one being bigger than a lot of the others, and we'll have to see what they do. But let's just go through these really quickly. Jan Mahinmi is an expiring on that, big deal. They're not going to bring him back. He is, he's a veteran pickup, potentially could go somewhere else on a veteran minimum. But, Washington doesn't care about him. He's, well outside their timeline, doesn't really contribute too much for them. So, Jan Mahinmi's going to walk. Shabazz Napier has been a pretty good, backup point guard for a lot of, he's bounced around the league over the last couple of years, and he's been a guy who's actually been pretty solid. I actually saw an article the other day saying that he, has a chance to actually get paid, earn a little bit more than the veteran minimum, depending on what the market looks like for point guards. He might get, a decent amount of contract for a player of his caliber. I can't imagine the Wizards are too interested in bringing him back. That's not going to be a super high priority for them, especially with Wall getting healthy. They're not going to need him as much. And then he's 29 years old. He's probably going to look for an opportunity to contend if a contending team wants him. So we'll have to see what happens with him, but I don't think he's a high priority for them either. Gary Payton II, into the bench guy. Jerry Grant, Jared Uthoff, all, into the bench type players. Not really too significant. If they want to bring him back on a one-year deal, that's fine. And then they have, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to say it. Anzej Pasisniks. If anybody actually knows how to say that name, correct me in the comments, because I'm pretty sure that was right. So Anzej Pasisniks is a guy at 24 years old who, has a little bit of potential. I believe they got him in the draft or maybe traded for him. I don't even remember. But he is a guy who, at 24 years old, might still have a little bit of something to contribute. So maybe they'll bring him back as well. And then let's get to Davis Bertans, who is, the big free agent for them this summer. And he is a guy who had a big breakout season at age 27, shooting the ball from downtown, showed, to be one of the best stretch fours, stretch big men in the league after being traded from the Spurs. He is a guy who will certainly get a lot more than the $7 million he was on the books for this season, and there will be no shortage of teams who are interested in adding him to their roster, especially contenders. There's always teams out there who need shooting, and he is one of the best in the business at doing just that. So we've heard that the Wizards have been motivated to bring him back. That's one of the reasons they didn't move him at the deadline, because, they could have moved him and gotten some value back, but they chose to hold on to him past the trade deadline last year. So, it depends on what the Wizards are trying to do. We've heard some, rumors that they're going to try to push for the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. They believe that John Wall is back and healthy. Bradley Beal is still very good. And with Bertans and a couple of their young players getting better, they have a chance to challenge for the 7th or the 8th seed. They were the 9th seed this year. They were kind of right there. And so, from their perspective, with Wall healthy, another year of development for Hachimura, some of their other younger guys, they can really be in the mix for that 7th, 8th seed. Personally, I don't know why you would do that. You're just, fighting for an opportunity to get swept into the first round. But if that's what they want to do to satisfy their fans or whatever, then sure. And bringing back Bertans will certainly go a long way towards that. But I would warn against committing too much long-term money for him. He is a guy, not that I don't believe in Bertans continuing to sustain this level of production, but I do want to raise a couple of red flags just because this does kind of feel a little bit like a flash in the pan season, where a guy who hasn't been super great up to this point in his career has a breakout role with a new team. Somebody's going to give him a lot of money. Will he live up to a contract? I'm not sure. I wouldn't pay him like $20 million a season. I don't know if that's what he'll get, but I mean, I wouldn't break the bank for Bertans if that's what it comes down to. But if you can get him back on a fair deal, I think that makes a little bit of sense for Washington, because you can always flip him down the line. So now the big question, what would I do if I was Washington? And to me, it's pretty similar to the Spurs, which I talked about in my last video. This team has a choice to make, right? And for them, I actually think it's a little bit more consequential, considering Beal is a much better player than either Aldridge or DeRozan are for the Spurs. But this is a team that, if they're healthy and they keep all of their pieces, they can realistically hope for a low-seeded playoff spot in the Eastern Conference, especially with the 7th and 8th seeds being so wide open. They can potentially be one of those teams to slide into the postseason if, you know, they can talk themselves into Wall being healthy, bring back Bertans, young guys get better, Beal is still good, and we're a playoff team, right? But if it was me, that's not what I would do, because I generally feel like being stuck in the middle in the NBA is the worst place to be. And as long as Bradley Beal is healthy and on your roster, you're not going to be bad enough to have a really high draft pick, and you're not going to be good enough to really win titles unless you can somehow, you know, get rid of John Wall's money, bring in another star, you know, develop some young talent, whatever. It's not impossible to build a contender around Bradley Beal, but they're going to have to make a lot of moves in order to do that. So if it was me, I think they should trade Beal. It's been kind of a weird couple of years for him in Washington. You know, yes, he's going to get traded. No, he's not going to get traded. Yes, he's getting traded. No, he's not. Kind of back and forth. We've heard both. And I think it's probably time to do it, just because his value is never going to be higher than it is right now. He's coming off the best season of his career. You know, he's locked up for the next couple of years. There's plenty of teams out there who would, you know, absolutely break the bank on assets in order to get Beal. So right now feels like the appropriate time to flip him. And if you can do that and get back some really nice draft picks, and, you know, maybe a young player or two, and clear some salary cap space, that is something that I would heavily consider. So, you know, that's really what I think they should do, and kind of turn the team over to some of the younger players like Rudy Hachimura and Mo Wagner and Troy Brown Jr. And, you know, they've got a couple of other names on this roster, but they're also picking 9th in the draft this year. That's a pretty solid pick. It's a good spot to find some solid, you know, role players, guys who project well. And so really, I don't think that they need to specifically draft for need. Just really take best player available, depending on who's there at number 9. You know, potentially another wing. They can play alongside some of their guards. So I don't know. That's all. It depends on which direction they want to go, right? If it was me, I'd trade Bradley Beal, but I understand the team not wanting to, because that's a pretty big move to make after they've kind of been committed to keeping him for the last couple of years. Trading him now might feel like they're changing their mind after a while, which teams don't usually do. So we will just have to see what they decide on Bradley Beal. But that's going to be it for today's video. And this is, you know, we're chugging along. We're getting close to the end here. Only have, I believe, 8 teams left for the season previews leading up to the draft. I'm trying to get them all in before the draft, so it's pretty much going to be, you know, uploading it every other day or so I can get them all in before the draft happens. So that's going to be exciting. But anyway, that's going to be it for me today, and I'll see y'all in the next one.